After crossing over, Lin En became a nobleman. He thought he could have a worry-free life from now on, but he didn't expect his family to decline and was even arranged to become a lord in a remote and poor place. Fortunately, the farming system has been activated. High-quality seeds, I have them. Boutique spices, I have them. Breeding technology, I have it. With the help of advanced technology and system rewards, we are committed to developing our territory. Lord Farming Text, keywords of the novel. As a fallen aristocrat, I have opened the farming system without a pop-up window. As a fallen aristocrat, I have opened the entire TXT download of the farming system. As a fallen aristocrat, I have opened the latest chapter of the farming system to read. Chapter 1. Ashtown. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Ashtown. Ashtown, as the name suggests, has no presence like ashes and is extremely remote, known as a place of exile. Unfortunately, Lin is the lord of this place. At this moment, he was standing on the terrace of the castle, looking around. The night here was bright except for the moonlight. The cold wind blew by, but it couldn't dispel the frustration in his heart. The castle is located in the northeast corner of Ashtown, and is a 3-story building built entirely of bricks and stones. The doors and windows are damaged, and the wooden railings around it have begun to rot. There are also some withered vines on top, giving a sense of dilapidation. This is a distance from the town, and during the construction, we considered the possibility of warcraft appearing. We first let the serfs resist warcraft in exchange for time for the nobles to retreat. Lin thought of the magnificent castle he had lived in before, towering and towering, with surrounding walls measuring 3 or 4 meters high. Looking back at this place, a sense of contrast arose. It has been several months since Lin En crossed into this world and became a nobleman. He thought he was the perfect beginning, enjoying the various conveniences brought by his noble status. However, what happened next led him to hell. Due to the family's offending of the senior magician, it angered the magician. In order to quell the anger of the magician, the family sold a large amount of property, purchased high-level magic stones, and sought help from other nobles. After this incident, the family declined and could no longer support a luxurious life. After a while of wind blowing, Lin returned to his study and sat on a chair, his eyes filled with confusion, unsure of what to do next. The family was unable to recover in a short period of time, so there was a practice of giving their children territory, hoping that they would develop the territory economy and instead help the family. This was normal, but Lin was assigned to such a remote place. Upon arriving in Ashtown, he realized how outrageous the situation was. The residents were unable to even meet their basic needs, let alone pay taxes. Just as Lin was pondering what to do, a voice rang in his ear and a semi-transparent panel appeared in front of him. You have become the Lord of Ashtown and are now starting the farming system. Lin En was stunned for a moment, and immediately showed joy on his face. They all said that the system was a standard feature of the crosser, but it seemed that the panel was too simple. They said it was a farming system, with only simple information on it. Name. Lin. Identity. Lord of Ashtown. Points. 0. Next to personal information is a gray shopping button, which displays that points need to reach a certain level before it can be displayed. Lin couldn't help but complain about what kind of system this is. It's useless for him. At this moment, lines of words appeared on the panel. Task 1. An excellent lord should have a decent castle. Building a castle is inevitable. Please improve the castle, complete the task, and reward life seeds. Task 2. The people make a living by eating, and sufficient food can ensure the stability of the lord's position. However, the serfs in the territory encountered some planting problems, and after solving them, they can obtain high-quality wheat seeds. Looking at the 2 tasks, Lin was pondering in his heart. He knew about the life seed, which is an energy that knights cultivate through breathing techniques, similar to the magic of a magician. Each knight who cultivates the life seed will experience a rapid improvement in their own strength, representing the potential to become a nobleman. His father was like this, earning a title after making contributions. Lin's physique is average, and he doesn't have much talent. Although he is a nobleman with sufficient nutrition, he hasn't cultivated the seed of life. This is normal, but since he is assigned to this place, his strength is essential. This is the perfect castle, I don't know to what extent it needs to be improved. As for the planting problems encountered by the serfs, we need to go and take a specific look tomorrow. The wind blew in from outside the window, and the candles swayed. Even after living here for several months, Lin still missed the electric lights. Without a phone and internet, he felt bored and had to blow out the candles. He lay on the bed, looking at the ceiling, and the woolen mattress was a bit uncomfortable, but it had good warmth. Unconsciously, he fell asleep. The next day, when Lin opened his eyes, the sunlight had already shone through the window into the room. He stood up and looked at the layout of the room, calmed down for a moment, and finally transformed his mind. Putting on his clothes, Lin walked out in cowhide boots. It was early spring season and the morning temperature was still a bit cold. 2 maids had been standing at the door for a while, but due to the broken second-floor window, a cold wind blew in and they were shivering with cold. Young master. The maids bowed together and followed Lin. In the living room, there stood an elderly man with grey hair and neatly groomed, who was the butler Karis accompanying him. Seeing the young master get up, Karis immediately asked the servant to prepare breakfast and bring hot water. Lin washed his face and rinsed his mouth, but there was no toothbrush or toothpaste here, and the nobles didn't have the habit of brushing their teeth. After dinner, they would eat some special desserts to clear the smell from their mouths. Not long ago, white bread, cheese, 2 eggs, and a plate of pea and vegetable salad were placed on the table. Lin was not interested in eating. First, there were 2 tasks. Second, he still wanted to get up in the morning to eat a bowl of bean curd jelly served with sauce, plus steamed stuffed buns and deep-fried dough sticks. Young master, what's wrong with you? Is the food not very delicious? Do you want to cook some lamb? Karis, who was considerate, saw the young master's mood and took the initiative to ask. Upon hearing the lamb, Lin remembered when he first came to this world. He took a bite of the lamb and the pungent smell immediately made him vomit. Before he could handle the smell properly, he decided not to eat it again. Lin shook his head and said, I'm just thinking about the castle. Since we live here, this castle should look like something, rather than leaking air everywhere and being dilapidated on all sides. Do you have any thoughts on how to improve the castle? Karis immediately replied, a castle needs to have both residential and defensive attributes. Currently, neither attribute is available. We can recruit people from the town to build walls and repair the castle. Let's do it then. How long will it take to fix it? Lin gave the order directly. Karis immediately agreed and gave 2 weeks of time. Lin En thought for a moment, although he wanted to quickly obtain the seed of life, he also knew that building a house was not an overnight task. Okay, just 2 weeks, by the way, there's one more thing. Lin pondered and didn't directly inquire about the planting problems encountered by the Karis serf, but changed his wording. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. The situation is even more serious than imagined. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. The situation is even more serious than imagined. Last night, I thought for a long time. Since I came to Ashtown, my father made me the lord here. I can't let him down. How do you think I should manage the territory? Karis was slightly surprised. The young master was able to realize this, indicating that he had truly grown. He was arranged to follow young Master Lin to Ashtown, and naturally had dissatisfaction in his heart, constantly thinking about when he could go back. But he also knew that the current situation did not allow him to go back, and at least he needed to stay here for a short period of time. He calmed himself down, carefully considered it, and gave his own answer. Lin listened carefully, nothing more than governing the territory, managing serfs, growing food, and so on, through a series of methods to make the territory prosperous. However, these suggestions only exist in words, which is known as paper talk. Karis only knows the general situation of Ashtown, and he needs to ask the mayor of Ashtown for detailed information. Although they haven't been here for long, for a butler, this is an incompetent behavior. Lin didn't pursue it, just asked him to call the mayor over. Karis also realized his mistake and quickly ran out. In no time, a man wearing linen fabric clothes walked in and knelt on the ground. His body was short and round, looking like a wine barrel. "Dear sir, hello, I am your servant Ralph Morton." Ralph's forehead was tightly pressed against the ground, with his hands placed upside down in front of his head, making a very humble appearance. Karis frowned slightly, as if there was something that made him feel uncomfortable. Lin spoke up, "Look up and talk about the situation in Ashtown. You should know what lies can lead to." Ralph's body trembled for a moment, and he lifted his head with a flattering smile on his chubby face. "Sir, there are too many problems in the town, and I'm afraid saying it might make you angry," he said, "just say it." Lin's tone was very indifferent. He knew that in order to know detailed information, he had to do so, and the experience gained in the workplace was used here. Ralph spoke with a trembling voice. "You go." Karis spoke ill. Ralph knelt down again and said, "Lord," before leaving, showing Lin En an extremely respectful attitude throughout the entire journey. Until he left here and walked on the road, Ralph finally showed disdain and said, "He's just an abandoned nobleman. What's so remarkable about him, but anyone with some strength will not be assigned to become a lord here. No nobleman can stay here for a month and cannot bear to leave. In the end, I am the lord here." He dare not speak these words directly. After all, he is just a free citizen, with a vastly different status from the nobility. As for the castle repair mentioned by the lord, he will find a few familiar people to go over and see how many coins they have brought. Inside, both Lin and Karis had a serious expression on their faces, and the situation in Ashtown was far more serious than they had imagined. From Ralph's words, it can be inferred that the general problems in Ashtown are poverty, insufficient food and clothing, poor soil, poor crop yields, and the need to worry about the invasion of warcraft. In simple terms, it can be summarized as economy, food, and security. A territory that wants to develop has a great relationship with its residents. No matter which noble territory it is, free people and serfs are indispensable. They can live and work in peace, develop production, and pay more taxes, making the lord naturally richer. The sale of crops, livestock products, and other products produced within the territory, establishing a stable chain, is also a great good thing for the lord. But the problem is that the location of Ashtown is quite remote, and no merchants are willing to come over. In addition, with the influence of warcraft, the town has been invaded multiple times over the years. The townspeople have died, been injured, and fled, leaving only the majority of them as unfree slaves. If these people escape, no lords will be willing to take them in, but they will be directly executed. There aren't many people in Ashtown now, and both the economy and crops are in a mess, let alone the warcraft problem. Karis frowned. Before coming, he had a brief understanding of the situation in Ashtown, but now he understands how serious it is. Not to mention them, even the excellent children of the Count may not be able to handle these issues. After thinking for a moment, Karis said, "Young master, should we tell the Count to send a few knights to protect your safety? Does he really know how to send it? How can we raise it when he sends it over?" Lin asked in response. "The family is out of money, and even the daily life of the knights is barely maintained. Even if they are sent over, the cost of hiring knights will definitely need to be covered by Lin. He only has a small amount of gold coins in his hand, and it is a problem for him to survive. After all, you are his son." "Your Highness, he probably won't be able to do it," said Karis with some lack of confidence. His voice was getting lower and lower. The count must have known about the situation in Ashtown, but he still designated it as the territory of the young master. When he came over, he only sent him and a few servants, not even a trainee knight or trainee warrior. Can it be said that he really didn't like to see the young master so much? Speaking of which, young Master Lin has been weak and sickly since he was young, and he cannot become a knight at all. In other words, he has no potential, so it is difficult to say that he was assigned to Ashtown because he wanted him to live and die on his own. For a moment, he also felt worried about his future, with a feeling that he would never be able to leave. Lin didn't take care of the old butler, thinking to himself that as a modern person, he hasn't managed any territory, but that doesn't mean he doesn't understand anything. He knows very well what to do now. If you want to be rich, first build the road. If you have no conditions to build the road, then take a second step. Food issue. Whether it is the task or the stability of the territory, the issue of food must be resolved. As for the planting problems encountered by the serfs in the task, he also learned the reasons from Ralph. Let's go to the farmland now and see the specific situation, Lin said and walked out directly. The issue of food is an urgent matter, and if it cannot be solved, how can we develop our territory? Karis immediately asked the servants to prepare the carriage, but there was a concern in his eyes. Can it really be resolved? A carriage was walking on a muddy road, heading northwest of Ashtown. Ralph, who was at home, heard his subordinates inform the lord to go to the planting area. His eyes changed, and he cursed in his heart for meddling. He rushed over in a hurry. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Cursed Land. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Cursed Land. The carriage stopped, and Lin's eyes were filled with vast farmland and scattered old houses. This is the main crop cultivation area in Ashtown, where most of the crops are grown, harvested, and transported out. The serfs living in the houses were born for this. Karis said, "Young master, the crops grown in Ashtown are mainly wheat, soybeans, and peas. Many years ago, the town would still provide a batch of crops for the castle during the annual harvest season, but it gradually decreased until it disappeared. According to the mayor's report, this place has been attacked by warcraft, and countless serfs have died or been injured. The farmland has also been contaminated by warcraft, making it difficult for crops to grow." Lin En walked towards the farmland, which was the season for sowing, but the land was only briefly cultivated, and a strange smell filled the air, making him feel somewhat familiar. Upon hearing the commotion outside, the serfs came out of the room and saw each other's attire. They immediately knew it was a nobleman coming and quickly knelt down, afraid to say anything. Lin asked, "Why haven't we sowed the seeds yet?" The serfs did not raise their heads, fearing that they would tarnish the honor of the nobility. Karis scolded, "Lord, if you don't want to be hanged, just say something." A thin and wrinkled old man lifted his head and said in a trembling voice, "Sir, it's not that we don't plant, but that the seeds won't grow after planting." He knelt and crawled forward until he arrived at the farmland, reaching out his hand with cracked skin to dig up the soil. A large number of insects and uncooked wheat straw were churned out. The insects are constantly wriggling on the ground, and the large number makes it quite disgusting to watch. This land has been polluted by warcraft, and a large number of insects have appeared. No matter what kind of plants they plant, they cannot survive, the old man explained. Lin En frowned, knowing why the smell here was so familiar. He crouched down and reached out to dig the soil. Karis quickly shouted, "Young master, don't touch it, it's dirty." Before the words could be finished, Lin had already dug up a small piece of soil, which was just a handful of soil, but there were at least dozens of insects. Lin threw away the bug in his hand and understood the problem. This matter was very familiar to him, and he had encountered similar situations before when he followed his parents to farm. Just as he was about to say how to handle it, he heard a voice. "Sir, why did you come to this polluted land?" Raph, who looked like a wine barrel, ran over panting and worried. He gasped for breath and said, "You are a nobleman, don't be affected by this place. Why do you say that? Lin En became interested. Ralph took a few breaths and said, this field was previously contaminated by warcraft. Not only can it be a species that cannot grow on it, but anyone who comes into contact with the land will be cursed and will develop strange diseases for no reason. Several serfs have already died. The serfs kneeling on the ground all nodded wildly. Upon hearing this, Karis immediately became nervous and said, young master, let's hurry back to the castle and have adults help you take a look. This is a curse. He not only cares about the young master, but also about himself. Curses are the most terrifying kind of magic. Those who hear of them die in great sorrow and pain, and he wants to return to the castle. Lin remained unmoved and instead asked, what kind of strange illness? Ralph paused for a moment and hesitated, saying, it seems like there are many strange patterns on his body. I'm afraid it might be contagious, so I burned all these people. You shouldn't have touched the soil, right? He knelt down and said, sir, for the sake of your health, it's best to hurry back and take a look. I believe that with your identity, you can definitely clear the curse. Are you talking about this kind of pattern? Lin pointed to a serf. The others immediately looked over and found that there were red lines on his neck, which were not easily noticed. Due to kneeling, they happened to be exposed. The servants exclaimed in surprise, while Karis persuaded again. After seeing it, Ralph jumped up in fear, more agile than a rabbit. Ralph immediately realized that the Lord was still there and knelt down again. The serfs trembled and wanted to escape, but they knew that any action they made would be seen as disrespect to the nobility, which was a crime to be hanged. As for the serf pointed out by Lin, he was in a panic, his body trembling like a sieve, and he dared not speak. A smell filled the air, and he was scared to pee directly. Karis frowned and said seriously, if you do such disrespectful things in front of the nobles, you should hang yourself on the gallows. Lin En said, surprisingly, he was able to scare himself to the point of peeing in his pants, which proves the dignity of the nobility. Karis was speechless and wanted to refute, but for a moment he didn't know how to say it, and he felt that the statement was also quite right. Lin En looked at the serf and said, I'll give you a chance to explain. Anyway, I won't kill you. The Lord has said so, and the serf said with a crying voice, I just feel my neck itching, and I don't know if it's a curse. This is the curse. Ralph suddenly spoke with a fearful expression on his face. Sir, please leave here and don't get caught in the curse. Nonsense, do you know what it takes to distort facts? Lin angrily rebuked in vain. Ralph was startled and instinctively reached out to grip his waist, as if realizing something. He lay tightly on the ground, afraid to speak. Lin said, the tattoos on his neck are clearly bloodstains scratched, and he made such a move due to itching. However, you accused him of being cursed and deceiving the nobles. You should be hanged. When they described the patterns, Lin really thought there was a curse here, and only by looking at the bloodstains on the serf's neck did he understand the root cause. These serfs rarely bathe and have thick dirt on their bodies, emitting a foul odor. In addition, living near farmland, insects inevitably enter their houses, which can cause itching and scratching, forming strange patterns. Ralph's head was lower, wishing there was a big hole on the ground for him to stuff his head in. Karis hesitated, as if wanting to say something. Lin noticed his expression and took the initiative to say, are you trying to say why there are so many insects in this farmland, since it's not a curse? Karis nodded and said, young master, curses are an indescribable energy, we still need to be cautious. I don't care if there is a curse here, you people will immediately find firewood and burn this farmland in all directions without any omissions. Lin added, shouting passionately, flames burn evil. In front of nobles, there is no evil that can be done recklessly. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Ralph's Concealment. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 5. Praise Lord. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Praise Lord. Karis gently closed the door and stood at the door, wiping away the tears from the corners of his eyes, with a relieved expression on his face. To be honest, his position in the castle was not high, and there were too many people who were more outstanding than him. However, the comfortable life there could not be compared elsewhere. Before being arranged to come to his territory with young Master Lin, he consulted and inquired about the general situation of Ashtown. Let's put it this way, people who come here find it difficult to survive. Once, knights were sent here, but they haven't been in contact with the castle for a long time and have been declared dead. After learning about Ashtown, he had the idea of escaping, but hesitated. Perhaps the actual situation here was different. He believed that his abilities were sufficient, and if with his help, the territory's economy would improve. When he returned to the castle, his status would also rise. One more thing, although he was a free citizen, he stayed in the castle for too long and didn't know what would happen if he left. He still had ambitions and didn't want to give up like this, but he was also very worried that a young aristocrat who had just reached adulthood would collapse if he was assigned to such a remote and barren territory. Seeing the young master changing now may be a bit slow, but it also represents hope, especially since he took the initiative to seek help. It seems that these past few days of life have made the young master realize that he wants to live, so he can no longer be like before. This transformation also raised a slight desire for life in Karis's heart, perhaps helping the young master develop his territory and possibly returning to the castle again in the future. On the bed, Lin, covered in a woolen mattress, placed his hands under his head, pondering over the matter. He has been in this world for several months, but he is still cautious. After all, there is a wizard here. If he discovers that his soul comes from another world, he may be pulled out and subjected to various torments. What he needs to do is to adapt without revealing his identity, which is why he borrowed the words of the cult and the intentional anger just now, both of which are effectively expressing the dignity of the nobility. Fortunately, Karis and his attendants were not very familiar with him. The only impression was that he was weak and sickly, with little potential, and even abandoned by the count. They were not very familiar with his other personalities and knowledge, which gave Lin room to play. Lin couldn't help but sigh in his heart, thanks to his previous experience in the workplace, which allowed him to play such a similar role. Just like just now, he knew that Karis would largely stop him. From the time he had been in contact with him, it seemed that Karis was someone who particularly wanted to return to the castle. Perhaps due to his age, he was more stable in his work, but it also represented following the old ways in handling things. He used Karis's persuasion to drag this matter forward in advance. Lin knew that this ruffian was not easy, even with a difference in status. If he really wanted to move him, the few powerless servants around him would not have any effect. It was uncertain who would live or die by then. Ralph is a free citizen, not a serf. If he commits a crime, he can easily escape. Ashtown is so far from the castle, and with the speed of letter transmission, when he reaches there, Ralph still doesn't know where to escape. Lin En is clear about the truth behind cheating and needs to be confident before dealing with it. Unconsciously, he has started to get used to the life here. The next day. After breakfast, Lin took a carriage to the farmland. After arriving, the situation in front of him really surprised him. Large areas of farmland have been plowed over and over again, digging out deep layers of wheat straw. The surface soil is relatively dry, but the soil beneath this layer appears black and shiny with oil. Lin's eyes widened as he looked. This was fertile black soil. In the world he was in before, it was a precious resource that could be stolen and sold. I didn't expect such a large area to be all black soil. No matter what crops are planted on the black land, they can all get a daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables, harvest. Because of the so-called curse, they have been wasted for years. Apart from the black soil, he was also quite shocked by the speed of the work of these serfs, but only one night had passed, and with a shovel and heavy plow, he had turned over 1/10 of the land. A large amount of straw piled up on the surface, thick enough to reach Lin's calves. He suspected that for decades, only returning the straw to the field would produce so many bugs. Lin walked over and saw the serfs kneeling on the ground, their bodies trembling. He couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong with you?" Old Tom, dressed in tattered linen clothes and not even wrapped himself, pressed his forehead to the ground and said in fear, "Sir, we didn't turn over all the farmland before you arrived. As a rule, we would be hanged." His voice was trembling. Even if he knelt on the ground and spoke to a lord, it was disrespectful to the nobles. Yesterday, the lord arranged the task, and in their minds, it was to be completed before the lord came. They have only completed 1/10 of the work now, and they are still far from it. Lin glanced at the other serfs, who were all afraid of death. No wonder they showed such behavior. This farmland has a vast area, at least hundreds of acres, and these serfs are only a few dozen people. It is impossible for them to complete the plowing in one night with current tools. By the way, they have been busy all night. Lin couldn't help but sigh that in the past, working people used to stay up late and work overtime, but now serfs work all night. They also have to fear being hanged, which is the difference in their social status. He is not a harsh boss, so naturally he wouldn't really hang these serfs. If they die, who will work for him? Lin looked at the butler Karis, who immediately understood his idea, which can be said to be something that all noble lords and butlers would do. Karis scolded, "Your Highness has instructed you to do something, which is a supreme honor, but you have not completed it. You should be hanged here in the farmland." As soon as these words were spoken, the serfs trembled even more, and some even fainted due to excessive fear. Old Tom's eyes turned black. He was getting old and didn't have many years to live, but he still had children. If he died, what would the children do? Just then, Lin's voice rang out, "Karis, don't be so ruthless. Give them some time, I believe they will complete the task of farming." A plain and indifferent sentence, yet like a holy light shining on the hearts of every serf, gave them a glimmer of light before their eyes. And in that bright light, it was Lord. Thank you, Lord. Praise Lord. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. High-quality wheat seeds. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. High-quality wheat seeds. The serfs kept praising. As soon as they stepped into the gates of hell, their hind legs were saved by the Lord. This feeling of going from death to life will be completely engraved in their bones. From this moment on, they completely recognized the Lord. Lin was very satisfied with their performance, and his harmony with Karis was known as one singing red face and the other singing black face. As long as the Lord was not particularly extreme in personality, he would do so to consolidate his position. "Get up, I need to see flames burn these sins," Lin ordered. Several unconscious serfs were awakened by their companions, but before they could react, they were pulled away. Old Tom brought a torch over and knelt down on both knees, as if offering some treasure. The first fire should be ignited by the Lord himself. Lin took the torch and walked to the farmland, igniting the firewood laid on it. The flames rose up, symbolizing the beginning of burning evil. The serfs, on the other hand, ran to other places with burning branches. Soon, the flames on the land burned fiercely, mixed with crackling sounds and thick black smoke. The wheat straw that had not yet rotted burned one after another, and the insects hidden inside twisted their bodies in the flames, gradually turning into ashes. In the firelight, Lin's figure was particularly dazzling, and the serfs knelt down one after another, reflecting the heroic demeanor of the Lord in their eyes. Black smoke billows and flames ravage. Karis watched this scene, unsure if the curse could be cleared, but one thing was certain. The young master's authority had already been imprinted in the hearts of every serf. The people in the town all went out one after another and looked towards this side. Ralph did not come over. He stood in front of his own door, looking at the black smoke, his face uncertain, and he didn't know what he was thinking. Standing beside him was a skinny man with dark skin, prominent cheeks, and fierce eyes. "Sir, should we?" "Shut up, Ferrari, it's not time yet." Ralph shook his head. This big fire burned for most of the day until it gradually extinguished in the afternoon. The ground was covered in ashes, and the surface of the soil had been baked hard by the high temperature. The air was filled with a strange smell, like charcoal barbecue. The serfs were digging for soil with shovels, but did not see any insects. They went to the unburned farmland again to dig soil. With a shovel, they could see insects constantly wriggling. Comparing the two, as long as they were not blind, they could know that the Lord's decision was correct. Flames burn evil, bringing the earth back to its original state. Karis exclaimed, "This is a curse. The young master has truly overcome the curse, which is something that cannot be seen even in the castle. Every person who suffers from the curse dies in pain." He really didn't expect the young master to solve this problem that even magicians are troubled by. If this matter were to be brought to the castle, it would definitely make the count happy. Karis looked at young Master Lin and inexplicably had some different thoughts in his heart. Perhaps young master could really develop his territory. The death of insects was an extremely shocking and joyful event for the serfs. For many years, due to the curse on this farmland, it was impossible to grow crops. Not only could it not be handed over to the castle, but even these serfs were unable to meet their basic food and clothing needs. Not being able to eat enough and suffering from the curse of being burned to death by the mayor, every serf was deeply afraid from the bottom of their hearts. Now that the curse has been eliminated by the Lord, they don't have to worry about being burned, and they can completely plant crops. This is a beginning, but it has extraordinary significance. And all of this was brought by the Lord. Lin was not surprised by this result at all. Flames can burn many things, let alone just insects. He turned his head to look at the serf and shouted loudly, "The sins have been burned, and the rest will be left to you to deal with." The serfs praised the Lord's honor one after another. Previously, they were only afraid of the Lord and did these things, but now they genuinely believe in the Lord and even work harder. Seeing that the mindset of the serfs had changed, Lin expressed satisfaction and arranged for them to continue cultivating the land, while leaving himself. Lin returned to the rudimentary castle, where the maids had already cooked hot water and the maids were waiting at the door with clothes. After taking a hot bath, Lin changed into clothes. Due to being in the field at noon, he didn't eat and his stomach is very hungry now. On the table were white bread and jam, a mixture of cooked peas and lamb, and a vegetable salad. Lin ate the white bread in big gulps. After hesitating for a moment, he took a bite of the lamb and found that the taste was still difficult to swallow. Not only was it due to the fishy smell, but the lamb was not stewed thoroughly enough, making it particularly difficult to eat. Even a young man with good teeth like him couldn't chew it. After just taking a bite, Lin stopped looking. It wasn't that he was picky about food. Even the most ordinary lamb soup he had ever eaten before was hundreds of times stronger than this. He probably wouldn't eat it until he was extremely hungry. After dinner, Karis came in and looked at the lamb on the table with a slight change in his face. He said, "Young master, you need to eat more meat. Only by eating meat can you." Lin waved his hand and said, "You guys eat, I need to take a break." Karis wanted to continue persuading the young master to stay in the farmland for so long, how could he not eat meat? But when he saw that the young master had already gone upstairs, he had to give up. Returning to the room, Lin looked at the panel in front of him. The task of repairing the castle was in progress, while the task of solving the problem of serfdom cultivation had changed. Task 2. The people make a living by eating, and sufficient food can ensure the stability of the Lord's position. However, the serfs in the territory encountered some planting problems, and after solving them, they can obtain high-quality wheat seeds, completed. Do you want to receive rewards? After Lin received the reward, a urea bag appeared on the ground out of thin air. System prompt. Lord gains a bag of high-quality wheat seeds, 3 points. High-quality wheat seeds, survival rate of 80%. In Lin's personal information, there is also an additional 3 after the points, but the mall button still appears gray, and it is unclear how many points are needed to open it. Looking at the bag, Lin opened it and found familiar wheat seeds inside. He had grown the fields with his parents before. His father drove a tractor to plow the ditch, while he sprinkled wheat seeds. His mother followed behind and sprinkled fertilizer. Turning his mind, Lin felt a bit surprised. He thought the reward was just a small seed, but he didn't expect to be so sincere in giving a big bag, enough to plant a lot of land. However, as a result, new troubles arose. How should he explain the sudden appearance of wheat seeds? The matter of the system is his biggest secret, and it must not be enough for others to know. Usually when he goes out, the butler Karis and a few male servants will always be with him, and he won't be given a chance to be alone. It's really difficult to take the seeds to the farmland. Lin walked back and forth, thinking of countermeasures. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Aggrieved Maid. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The aggrieved maid Karis, with a serious expression on his face, came to the kitchen, holding a plate filled with lamb in his hand, and threw it onto the table, spilling out the sticky soup inside. The maid was startled and lowered her head, unsure of what she had done wrong. "Ellie, is this the dish you made?" Karis looked quite unpleasant and scolded, "The taste is extremely bad. No wonder the young master doesn't want to eat it. Do you know that the young master is not in good health and needs to supplement nutrition? How do you want the young master to eat this? You have also worked in the Count's castle kitchen, and theoretically your cooking skills should not be so poor. Or do you deliberately want to eat this lamb yourself?" Ellie immediately knelt down and anxiously explained, "Carrie Butler, I didn't mean to do this. When I was helping in the kitchen before, I was mainly responsible for washing dishes and never cooked a few meals. I could make simple toasted bread and vegetable salads, but I wasn't good at cooking, especially meat and vegetables." Karis's expression froze for a moment, and he didn't expect it to be for this reason. "Even Jimmy and Nuancia don't know," he said, "they don't even know how to bake bread, they just play tricks on me," Ellie said with a tearful tone. Karis didn't know what to say for a moment, but after a while, he snorted angrily. It's not targeting Ellie, but the people in the castle. Whether he was the butler, or the male or female servants were arranged by the castle, they were assigned to this hopeless Ashtown. The people inside the castle must have felt that the Count had abandoned young Master Lin, not even the accompanying knights, and the quality of the arranged servants was so poor that even basic meals could not be prepared. He couldn't imagine what his future life would be like. He had a little hope before, but now it has been extinguished by cold water. What's going on? Lin was thinking about how to take the seeds out when he heard a sound coming from outside. He stood by the window, looking down. Carlos was about to say something when the young master had already left the window. Lin opened the door and saw 2 plainly dressed maids waiting at the door, trembling with the wind, their small faces slightly pale, and their exposed thin legs flushed with cold. However, they dared not have any thoughts of leaving. These 2 maids, as well as the maid outside who was being scolded by Karis, were arranged by the castle. At that time, when he was leaving the castle, he brought 3 maids and 4 male servants, saying that he would send people over later, but the authenticity is unknown. They are not very old, probably only around 16 or 17 years old, with a slight hint of immaturity on their faces. The 2 have different personalities, wearing plain long dresses with a more introverted look. Jimmy, on the other hand, has a girl-like liveliness, with a few small flowers embroidered on the hem of the skirt. In the future, you don't have to wait here anymore. When I have something to do, I will naturally call you. Lin is not used to having someone standing at the door, always feeling like he's prying into his secrets. Thank you, young master, but Karis Butler, Jimmy hesitated. I will talk to Karis. Jimmy immediately became happy and gave a glance to Nuancia. They didn't have to wait in front of the young master's door every day, so they were free. However, Niansha didn't have much excitement on her face, and there was actually a hint of disappointment in her eyes. Lin arrived at the kitchen for the first time. The small kitchen was very rudimentary and didn't have many utensils. It was like a fireplace stove with pots on top, which had a bit of a rustic feel. Karis quickly explained the reason behind the matter. Lin frowned tightly. Ellie knelt on the ground, not daring to breathe, afraid that she would be hanged. Lin doesn't have much memory of Ellie, to be precise. If they hadn't followed him to Ashtown, there wouldn't have been any intersection. Raise your head. The young master's words made Ellie instinctively lift her head and become a maid in the castle, with a natural difference in appearance from the serfs. Tears streamed down her cheeks, giving off a feeling of pear blossoms and rain. Lin waved his hand and said, "I'm in a good mood today. Let's get over this matter, but I still need to pay more attention to my food. Can you improve your cooking skills?" Ellie was spared from punishment and breathed a sigh of relief. Upon hearing the young master's words, she nodded like a chicken pecking at rice. "When I came over here, my mom in the kitchen gave me a recipe that recorded a lot of dishes. As long as I had time, I could definitely make them," she said. "Oh." Lin En became interested. "Let me take a look." Ellie immediately found a recipe book, claiming it was actually made from pieces of birch bark. After all, the written records here are usually made of papyrus and parchment rolls, and only nobles can have sufficient money to purchase. Lin took it over and flipped through it. There were simple pictures on the bark of the birch tree, from which one could see that the other person had a talent for painting and could delicately depict the process of cooking. 2 birch peels serve 1 dish, and the thick recipe contains about 5 or 6 dishes. Lin's eyes lit up. As a foodie, he naturally had a lot of culinary skills, but he couldn't fully utilize them. Now, this recipe gave him a reason and an excuse. "I took it," Lin said. Ellie couldn't understand why the young master wanted to read the recipe. She had to learn from the recipe, but she didn't dare to speak out against it. Lin walked towards the castle and said, "Karis." Karis immediately trotted along. "Help me collect as many books as possible, I'm just too bored." Boredom is just an excuse. He wants to use the name of reading more books to present what he knows reasonably. "There is one more thing I need you to do. I need to understand the situation in Ashtown, including the area of the territory, the distribution of people in the town, the problems encountered by the residents, and so on. Can you do these things?" Karis nodded. These things were originally meant to be done. If it weren't for dealing with the issue of land curses these past few days, they wouldn't have been delayed until now. Returning to the house, Lin stopped and lowered his voice. "You said before that Ralph was not quite right. When you go to learn about the situation in the town, take a look. Although he is still useful, you should also know that I am the lord here." Karis was stern and his expression became serious. After making a promise, he left the castle. Lin arrived at the terrace on the 3rd floor, where he could see Ashtown in the distance and even further forests. The town was shrouded in a faint mist, making it difficult to see. Lin's eyes narrowed slightly. If the castle had arranged for knights to protect him, he wouldn't have had to be careful with even the mayor of the town. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Planting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Planting. The raging flames of the farmland burned for 2 days, and the entire land was covered in ashes. The serfs rummaged through the soil, but never saw the wriggling insects again. Sin is burned, and the Lord's radiance shines on the earth. This is the idea of the serfs, who firmly believe that under the leadership of their lords, they will eventually move towards a brilliant future. In the dilapidated house, old Tom looked at the child sleeping on the ground with a happy smile on his face. The child is only 7 or 8 years old, with mud on his face and body, thin and weak, but in the eyes of old Tom, this is his greatest treasure. He absolutely does not allow any accidents to happen to the children. Previously, the farmland was cursed, and he was constantly worried that the children would also be cursed. Fortunately, the Lord successfully eliminated the curse with the power of flames. Old Tom felt that the Lord was more reliable than the mayor, who did the act of forcibly burning serfs to death. Actually, upon careful consideration, Lord has already said that those patterns were scratched by the serfs themselves, and they are not curses at all. Those serfs who have already turned into ashes are really aggrieved. Speaking of which, since the mayor came here, Ashtown has been declining year by year. Although there were still good profits in the past, he felt that the mayor's behavior was a bit strange. On a recent night, he once saw the mayor walking through the farmland. I don't know where he went. Why is the mayor not afraid of curses? Old Tom was puzzled and didn't dare to think too much. There was a huge difference between the identities of serfs and free people. Your Highness is here. A noisy sound came from outside, followed by the sound of serfs rushing out. My son opened his eyes and didn't know what had happened. Old Tom grabbed his arm and said, "Lord, we're here. Let's go out quickly." Lin got off the carriage and looked at the rolling black soil not far away, nodding slightly. After burning the straw, the insects inside were naturally burned to death. Under the sunlight, the surface of the black land is suffused with oil. If crops are planted, it will definitely lead to a daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables. The serfs rushed out of the dilapidated house, knelt on the ground, and shouted loudly, "Lord." Compared to the previous 2 days, their spirits have improved significantly. Although they are still pale and thin, their eyes have a radiance, no longer affected by curses, and they have hope for their future life. And all of this is bestowed by the Lord. Lin is very satisfied with this. Although they are serfs, they also represent people. As long as people have faith, they will exert greater power. Lin walked up to Old Tom and looked at the little boy beside him. The little boy is not very old, with only a few pieces of torn fabric covering his body. His face and body are pitch black, but his eyes are bright and full of childlike curiosity. He looked up at Lin, unsure of what was on his mind. Old Tom noticed his son's disrespect and quickly pressed his head to the ground, constantly kowtowing, "I'm sorry, Lord, my son didn't mean to offend you." He was really afraid, and without the permission of the nobles, he would look at the other person directly with the eyes of a serf, which was an insult to the nobles and would be hanged. "This is your son, it looks like there's a big age difference between you two." Lin didn't blame him, but asked in confusion. Serfs are allowed to have children, and giving birth to each child means an additional commoner for the Lord. In the territory, the number of serfs is important, which means more people can work. Old Tom quickly explained that the birth of the child was an accident. Around the age of 4, his mother fell ill and died. He regarded the child as his driving force to survive, hoping to see him grow and flourish. His name was Old Tom, and the child was Little Tom. Lin understood. To put it simply, Old Tom didn't control himself and hit him with a single blow. He really wanted a child, so he decided to have a woman give birth. "How did you survive with your child when the land was cursed?" Lin was puzzled. The serfs themselves couldn't eat enough or wear warm clothes, and with such a mop, the difficulty of surviving would definitely increase several times. Old Tom said, "Previously, the land was not cursed, and the crops we planted would harvest abundantly every year. We don't have to worry too much about food issues. Just 5 years ago, due to the curse, the crops stopped growing, and the children were hungry. I had to take a risk and go to the forest to find something to eat." According to Old Tom's description, Lin couldn't help but admire that he had indeed fulfilled his father's duty. Everyone in Ashtown knew that there were warcraft in the forest, and entering it was likely to result in losing his life. He resolutely went in for his son. "Mushroom, you're talking about mushrooms." Lin's eyes twitched slightly. Old Tom said with a slight sense of pride, "Lord, there are many types of mushrooms. Some mushrooms will make my body soft when eaten, while others will die. I can distinguish more than 10 types of mushrooms, and it is precisely this ability that has allowed many people to survive. Later, the mayor said that this was too dangerous and did not allow me to enter the forest again. More than half of the serfs here have survived by eating the mushrooms he found, and old Tom has a certain level of prestige among them. You don't have to worry about food in the future. Lin raised his tone. He asked the servant to take out the wheat seeds from the carriage and said, I will provide you with the wheat seeds for planting. These are the high-quality wheat seeds I brought from the castle. You plant the seeds first, and I will continue to bring them to you later. When leaving the castle, Lin carried a lot of seeds and mixed the high-quality wheat seeds rewarded by the system, so that no one would be bored with checking. In order to make this matter foolproof, he has not yet asked Karis to come along. After obtaining their consent, the serfs approached and looked at the wheat seeds in the bags, making surprised sounds. The wheat seeds they had seen before were small and shriveled, not as plump as this one. The serfs were all shocked, truly worthy of being lords, even willing to take out high-quality wheat for planting. Without the curse and with high-quality wheat seeds, the serfs were as excited as if they had beaten chicken blood, picked up their tools, and began to cultivate. Lin left a servant to watch the serfs grow crops, while he returned to Ashtown all the way. If he wanted to truly understand the territory, he couldn't just stay in the house and wait for his subordinates to report. He had to go and see the specific lives of the people with his own eyes. The road is covered with feces, and the odor lingers. Even if there are not many people in Ashtown, the amount of feces accumulated every day is not a small amount. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Retrieve the venue. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Retrieve the venue. What should be hanged, damn it. I really want to throw Kurik's stinky shoes on his face. Karis, walking on the road, was cursing and had a rather ugly expression on his face. He couldn't help but stomp his foot and step on feces, splashing them onto his pants and face. He instinctively reached out and wiped his hand, looking at the stickiness on his hand, feeling a bit overwhelmed. He had never experienced such a thing in the castle before. It was always someone who respected him, rather than being fooled like this. Young Master Lin arranged for him to go and ask Ralph for seeds. It is now the season of spring plowing, and timely sowing is needed during this period to ensure the harvest of crops. They have already taken out some of the barley seeds they brought, but this is far from enough for hundreds of acres of land. Now that the curse has been solved, as long as the seeds are sown on the fields, there can be a daifengshu, salad of assorted fresh vegetables, harvest. The key lies in the problem of seeds. As the mayor of Ashtown, Ralph's family will definitely not be short of grain seeds. Today, Karis's task is to get the seeds from the other party. But as soon as it passed, Ralph had been grateful to the Lord. Finally, after he finished speaking, he revealed his purpose and the other party kept crying and struggling, which was truly the first time he had seen it. After all, he was said to have fainted and left Ralph's house in a daze, only to come back to his senses on the street. Karis didn't know how to inform young Master Lin about this matter. After all, before going, he had sworn that it could definitely be completed. A figure appeared in front of him, and Karis looked up. Young Master Lin was looking at him with a caring expression on his face. What's wrong? At that moment, Karis felt like he had finally found a place to rely on and couldn't help but speak up about what had happened. Listening to Karis's crying voice and his description of Ralph, Lin understood one thing. Although Karis is older, Ralph is even more cunning than him. In front of the other party, Karis, who had been living in the castle honestly, was completely put in a passive position. I see, let's go. Where are we going? Nature is to find a place. Lin's tone was not good. At the end of the day, Karis is his butler. Being bullied like this is equivalent to hitting his face. Beating a dog depends on the owner, and this matter won't end like this. However, Karis hesitated, afraid that with the young master's temper, he would make some actions to hang the other party. Karis is not foolish, and with these 2 days of questioning serfs and free people, he knew that Ralph's status in Ashtown was not low, and he also keenly discovered something wrong. If the young master forces the other party too much, something bad may happen. Just as he was thinking this, Lin's figure had gradually faded away, and Karis quickly caught up. On the south side of Ashtown, there are relatively few buildings here, and only a few houses are still in a dilapidated state, belonging to the impoverished area of the town. Unfortunately, the home of Mayor Raff is located here. Lin looked at the house, which was a simple 2-story wooden building with mottled stone pillars on both sides. Several miscellaneous houses stood tall with tightly closed window sills, and he didn't know what was inside. He strode into the room, and Ralph, who was sitting in a chair, saw Lin. He was clearly startled and quickly rolled off the chair, kneeling on the ground. "Dear Lord, your arrival has brought glory to all the rudimentary houses." Lin sat on the chair without saying anything. Ralph knelt like this, and for a moment the room was silent, even the sound of breathing could be heard clearly. Karis stood next to Lin, completely unaware of what the young master was going to do. As time passed, Ralph couldn't help but ask, "Sir, are you here for anything?" Lin suddenly shouted, "Do you know your guilt?" Karis standing next to him was startled and his heart was pounding. Ralph lowered his head, his eyes flashing with a hint of sharpness, but his mouth said, "Sir, I really don't know what crime I've committed." He had a plan in his heart. If the other party dared to punish him, he would plan ahead and at most lose some benefits. "How long have I been here? You haven't even taken out anything to eat or drink, so you look down on me." Lin said word by word, in a rather angry tone. Karis was stunned. He never expected the young master to say such a thing, and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Ralph felt contemptuous in his heart, thinking that the other party had discovered what he was doing. It turned out to be this problem, truly worthy of being a young master among the nobility, completely in line with his impression of the nobility. Ralph quickly gave himself a soft slap and said, "I'm so sorry, sir. I'll go get it right away." He ran out and soon brought over a few white bread, 2 apples, and a few bottles and cans. "Sir, we don't have much to eat here. Even the white bread was made yesterday and may be slightly harder. You can spread some honey on it. If you find the taste unpleasant, there is also nectar and jam," said Raff respectfully. Lin let out a growl, with a clear expression of disgust on his face, but skillfully cut open the white bread, spread honey on it, and took a bite. The softness of white bread is not as good as when it was first baked, and when paired with honey, the taste is still good. Karis on one side didn't understand at all. There was also white bread in the castle, why come here to eat it, or eat this kind of overnight food? Ralph was thinking, looking at the lord's eating habits, it seems like there is a shortage of food. Does it mean that he didn't bring much food and coins when he came here? He remembered that the butler had just asked him for seeds, and it seemed that the lord had taken out the wheat he had eaten as seeds, causing him to run out of food. Speaking of which, when the lord came over, it was just 2 carriages, and there wasn't much inside. Could it be that this noble lord is actually a silver like pewter spearhead? After finishing a piece of white bread, Lin took a bite of the apple and said, "The taste is barely there." He looked at Ralph and said, "You should know it's time for spring plowing. I can't delay it. I brought out the seeds from the castle, but it's far from enough. As a mayor, you've been here for so many years, and you should have wheat seeds at home." Just as Ralph was about to say something, Lin said directly, "Don't worry, you won't take it out for nothing. In a few days, someone from the castle will be sent to deliver some essential items. I will compensate you then." Lin stood up and stretched lazily. Although Ashtown is relatively remote, there is still a possibility of development. Before coming, my father had promised to give me some help, so I think he will give it at least 3 or 4 times. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. The History of Ashtown. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The history of Ashtown. Inside the house, Lin looked down at Ralph in the shape of a barrel and reached out his hand towards him. My palm fell on Ralph's shoulder and patted him a few times before Lin said, "To be honest, Ashtown is too backward to stay here for a long time. As a nobleman, if I were to stay, it would torture me. But since my father arranged for me to come, I need to make some changes and let him know that I have actually done something." After a pause, Lin spoke lazily, "After all, I don't want to live in Ashtown all the time. As for when to go back, it depends on the changes in Ashtown." Ralph's gaze changed, but his expression remained unchanged. "The seed issue." Lin paused for a moment. "Yes." Ralph quickly replied with a courteous smile, "Your Excellency, you have said so. As your leader, you should naturally provide unconditional support. I have some seeds here, which were originally used as food rations. Your Excellency, take the lead in taking out the seeds, and I will dedicate myself." His tone increased several tones. "I believe that under your leadership, Ashtown will undergo earth-shattering changes. Okay, I'm glad you can cooperate so well. When there's a chance in the future, I'll tell my father that maybe we can transfer you from Ashtown to the noble castle." Lin looked very pleased. "Karis, let's go back." Ralph watched the two of them leave until they couldn't see each other, before showing a sneering smile. "It's ridiculous to be transferred to a noble castle. Once the plan is completed, I can also become a noble." A thin and weak man walked out of the inner room and Ferrari whispered, "Sir, we just gave him the seed. Even if we don't give it, he can't do anything about it." Ralph shook his head and said, "If you can cooperate, try to cooperate as much as possible. After all, he is the nominal lord. I am just a mayor, and the plan will take some time to complete. We don't need to cause trouble. This nobleman is just an ordinary child." What he said earlier was nothing more than to showcase the nobleman's wealth, in order to win me over. If it were someone else, they would definitely feel that as long as they show loyalty, they could benefit from the nobleman. I don't even look up to these things. After all, if I open that magic seal, I can. Ralph's eyes showed ambition. Nobility is just an identity, there is something more powerful in this world than it. How was the seal broken? Ferrari replied, "According to the current progress, it will take about 2 weeks to break through, but..." Ralph's face darkened and he said, "No problem." "Yes, sir." Until he returned to the castle, Karis still couldn't figure out why there had been such a big change before and after Ralph. Even though he cried poverty when talking to him, he didn't mention the seeds at all, but in the blink of an eye, he said he could provide wheat seeds. After hesitation, he still chose to ask. Lin was somewhat disappointed that he would have such doubts. As a butler, he couldn't even see such simple things, and his mind was somewhat dull. However, there was also an advantage, which was that he wouldn't see his own differences. He gave a simple explanation, "Karis, I am a nobleman, and Ralph is just a free citizen. If he wants to obtain status and wealth, he must follow me. If he cannot even make this effort, why should I give him recognition?" Karis suddenly realized that it was so. Although it was a very simple truth, he actually overthought it. "Why do you say that the Count still sends people over to deliver resources? Not to mention this, Ralph won't cooperate and can't let him know our true situation. My father once taught me a lesson. For nobles, only falsehood and reality can make others wary." Karis greatly admired the Count in his heart, and even more so, he saw a change in his attitude towards young Master Lin, who had learned and worked hard. Perhaps Ashtown can really develop, and young Master Lin can definitely return to the castle with this credit, so he can naturally follow and leave. Thinking of this, the haze in his previous heart cleared away, and his face was once again filled with a smile. Lin looked at Karis's appearance and felt a sense of innocence in his heart. "What progress has been made in the investigation I asked you to make these past few days?" Karis immediately said, "I went to the town to inquire about many serfs and liberals, and learned a lot from their mouths." He explained in great detail what he had learned. In fact, Ashtown has a long history, at least over 100 years. It is said that at the beginning, this was a place where a magician temporarily settled, but later left without taking away the servants who followed him. Thanks to the influence of the magician, the surrounding monsters did not dare to approach, and these servants lived here, married and had children, gradually establishing Ashtown. Long years have passed, and those servants have long died. Their bloodline descendants either passed away or left, leaving only a few in the town. Later, there were incidents of warcraft ravaging, killing many people and forcing some free people to leave. It is not yet known whether there are descendants of servants in the town, at least the people asked by Karis are not clear. 5 years ago, Ralph was appointed as the mayor and came to Ashtown. Wait, 5 years ago. Lin keenly sensed something was wrong. He remembered old Tom saying that the land curse appeared 5 years ago, and Ralph came 5 years ago. Is it a coincidence or is it? Karis nodded and said, that's right. 5 years ago, the previous mayor was bitten to death by a warcraft, and Ashtown lost its mayor. Moreover, the land was cursed by warcraft blood, making it impossible to regenerate crops. After Ralph came over, he also used various methods to deal with the curse, which was of no use. On the contrary, some people who came into contact with the land were cursed and had to be burned to death. Lin furrowed his brow, and Karis still felt that the land was cursed, but in reality, it was just a scratch from the serfs themselves. However, according to his words, the curse appeared 5 years ago, and it took at least 5 years for the straw and wheat in the land to accumulate so much. So why did the crops continue to grow before, only 5 years ago was not enough? Is it really because of the curse of warcraft blood? Lin En is a bit confused. Why are there no insects after the flames burn? He tapped his head, and Karis quickly asked, young master, are you tired? Do you want to rest for a while? When I wake up, I'll have Ellie prepare the food. End of this chapter.